Um, Looks like we still have a lot of people joining, but I don't like some dead air. So I did want to welcome everybody who's already signed on to the webinar. My name is Jim Turner. I am, for those of you who don't know me, I'm the former CEO of Hilltop Consultants, now Executive Vice President of Business Development for Frontline Managed Services. And I guess we've got 40. Lewis and Jason, I guess I can go ahead and introduce you as well. So let's start. Okay. All right. For those of you who don't know Frontline, I guess I can start there. Frontline Managed Services, we're a leading global provider of outsourcing solutions. The name may not be familiar to everybody as it's a recent rebrand where we rebranded from IntelliTeach and Hilltop Consultants after our acquisition. So if you have not worked with us before, it might be a new name. I want to start by introducing Lewis and Jason. First, our guest of honor, I guess, is Jason Thomas. Jason is a CIO of Cole, Scott & Cassane for the last 5 years, and he has been very generous to offer his time today talking to us about his experience. Also with us, we have Lewis Evans. Lewis is the product marketing manager for Arctic Wolf, and he is going to be doing a lot of the speaking today during the webinar. And I'm going to get out of the way of these guys for the most part because they're the real brains here. Let's, Lewis, would you like to go ahead and start?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, Jim. Jim right here. I know we had to skip through here, but yeah. Thanks to you and to Frontline Managed Services for hosting this event. Right before we dive into this agenda, we got a lot of stuff, so we'll move pretty quickly. Want to answer 2 common questions that tend to come up around webinars. We will be recording this and distributing it afterwards. If you have questions, feel free to drop them into the questions field, and we'll we'll save some time at the end of this to answer the ones that we're able to, and we'll work diligently to follow up with any ones that we aren't able to get to in the window. So today's agenda, we'll start off by asking, ransomware, is it still even a threat? Brief spoiler there, it is still a threat. We're still pretty concerned about it in the cybersecurity space. That's why we're holding this webinar, and that's what we're going through. Then we'll discuss what it is, a brief history of ransomware, ransomware today, and what's a ransomware attack like, which will include a very brief simulation from me and a much more involved discussion from Jason, who's got some personal experience tackling that challenge in the ransomware case study. Then we'll touch on best practices before, during, and after a ransomware attack, cover some key takeaways from the presentation, and then move into Q&A. So I want to start off, and I suppose I biased the result here with a poll, which should be appearing for you now. What's your current perception of the threat level of ransomware today? And I think that, I like to start off with this question. It should take just a minute. Okay, yeah, there you go. Poll is in progress. We're collecting responses. And yeah, I just want to baseline that. Okay, numbers are coming in, and we're seeing the majority falling into the high bucket. Maybe a third in the medium bucket, numbers fluctuating around that, and then smaller percentages in low and extreme. All right, well, you can keep polling on that, but oh, there we go. Okay, so that's honestly, I'm glad to hear that, because there's something of a perception sort of in general, in the general public, that ransomware was an issue that we mostly faced 4 or 5 years ago with some high profile attacks that we saw in high awareness, high sort of newsworthiness. There were some major commercial attacks. There was a big wave of end user or sort of customer individual focused attacks. But ransomware is still a threat, especially for businesses, including law firms. And we've seen over those past couple of years, since that big initial spike of mass awareness on ransomware, that attackers have pivoted toward enterprise. Like the white hats out in the universe, attackers have realized that the enterprise is where the money is. The enterprise is where there are valuable targets, people with the technical expertise required to respond to a ransomware attack effectively, and the budget to pay the ransom if the attackers are effective. And so they've been increasingly pivoting to target enterprises. And I think that reality is why the attendees on this webinar have recognized that. I think the final percentage here is 59% high, 34% medium, 3% each in low and extreme. And I think that's a good distribution of understanding around the dynamic of the ransomware threat today. Just to put a bit of a quantitative frame on that, the expectation, the most recent projections are that every 10 or 11 seconds in 2021, this year, we're going to see a ransomware attack, a new ransomware attack on business, on average. And so, given how wordy I tend to be, that means several ransomware attacks per slide. And that is a quadrupling of the rate of ransomware attacks that we saw in 2016. The ransom payment, the ransom payment demanded is growing as well. So again, sort of most recent numbers, obviously, when you're looking at statistics like this and analyses like this, you're playing catch up on reality. So the most recent numbers available are Q1 of 2020. There was a 33% growth in ransomware payment. And the thing I want to flag about that is, I've been talking about ransomware now for a couple of years. Every time I check in, there's been a quarter-over-quarter growth in the average ransom payment demanded, every time. This isn't just a, sort of month-by-month fluctuation statistic. We're seeing ransom payments continuously rising, and that's driven by attackers getting, smarter and more efficient, targeting larger and larger enterprises more effectively, and developing some new tactics to increase the pain they're able to credibly threaten to defenders, and so the ransom payment that they think they're able to demand or expect. Okay, so with that perception of the threat, let's take a step back and sort of level set on the technical questions, the reality of the ransomware, of what ransomware is, the sort of reality we mentioned in the front there. This may be familiar to some folks, but I like to start these conversations with a clear definition of terms. So what is ransomware? Probably those of you rating it as a high or extreme threat have already heard most of this, but it's a subcategory of malware. And what ransomware typically does is encrypt valuable information and request a payment to have that decrypted. A ransomware attack is when ransomware is deployed by malicious actors. We see that in cybersecurity at Arctic Wolf, we see the majority of all categories of attack are, at this point, financially motivated malicious actors. Ransomware, that's overwhelmingly the case. There's basically no recreational use of ransomware. There's very little of all of these other sort of attacker profiles. What we're typically dealing with is a criminal gang that habitually uses ransomware to try to make a lot of money. Ransomware is therefore deployed via 3 avenues that are often exploited by this category of attackers: either an email phishing campaign, a known software vulnerability, or configuration scanning to identify an unsecure remote desktop protocol configuration. Once the attackers have identified their entry points into the environment, depending on how sophisticated they are, they can aim for wide lateral distribution before launch, which is to say that they'll try and install the ransomware on as many valuable systems as possible before activating any of it. Ransomware is a category of attack where once the attack begins, defenders know that it's happening. It's not like data exfiltration exercises or other sorts of malicious attack where you might not find out for weeks or months. Once the attack is engaged, the attack itself is engaged, defenders will be aware of it. So attackers respond to that by trying to distribute the malware as widely as possible, and often, again, the more sophisticated attackers, they're looking for a moment to activate that attack that will be maximally disruptive to the business. So the classic example of this is, waiting until, identifying a business or a group of businesses that can be targeted all at, 7 p.m. on Friday on a long weekend or something like that, so that the users, the defenders return to the environment and it's been very thoroughly compromised for a long time, or the night shift is required to engage with that, and delays and disrupts the defender's ability to prevent all of these systems from being compromised. Ransomware can occur as a pure attack or as part of a more complicated hack. Again, at the sort of top end of the attacker universe, there are really sophisticated advanced threat groups. Some of them nation state sponsored, some of them are just independent attack gangs, and they may use ransomware as one of several stages. Maybe they'll go in, exfiltrate some data which they never intend to return or conceal. They'll sell that off, and then they'll sort of detonate ransomware to cover their tracks and for a final financial exploit. But on balance, the majority of ransomware attacks are, the objective is to get the ransomware into the system and compromise as much as possible. Those pure ransomware attacks, again, we're seeing a shift toward targeted attacks. There are certainly spray and pray phishing campaigns where attackers will, try and hit sales@companyname.com for a list of, tens or hundreds of thousands of company names and sort of see what systems they turn up. But this is less effective, and it's less financially effective for them, and it's less destructive for defenders. So we're seeing more and more of a shift toward a targeted attack where the attackers identify a company or a group of companies, or some sort of unified supply chain attack. They try to get their ransomware into as many systems as possible, activate it all at once, and by threatening sort of catastrophic business damage and overwhelming defenders, and especially sort of defenders across an area. So we saw an attack, I think it's a couple years ago now, and where it was, a whole region of Texas was many sort of towns and municipalities in a region of Texas. So it wasn't just that the defender is in one location, but even the consultants that you might bring out to address that, and the people with experience across those in that region with those systems were completely overwhelmed, and they expect that this gives them greater leverage to demand that ransom and to successfully extract it. Probably the biggest change we've seen over the past year is ransomware attackers are much more likely now to exfiltrate and threaten to leak or publish data. So they will encrypt the data where it resides on your systems. They will publish some small amount of the data, and they'll say, pay the ransom and we'll decrypt your systems. If you don't pay the ransom, we'll leave them encrypted and we will publish all of your data on this public-facing website. Now, there's sort of a trade-off around that, where if they do publish the data, that provides another avenue for recovery. But depending on the data in question, it may be much more destructive, and again, is another factor in these higher ransoms that are being demanded. The change in dynamic there is we've always said that, once your systems have been compromised by ransomware, because the malware has a command and control connection to the attacker servers, you've always had to deal with the possibility that data has been exfiltrated before being encrypted or during the encryption or what have you. But we're now seeing that possibility is transformed into a reality, and that attackers are verifying that they've exfiltrated that data, which increases the threat profile of a ransomware attack. So let's take a look at a very brief history. There's sort of the prehistory of ransomware runs from 1989 to the early 2010s. The first software that could fall under the classification ransomware was a Trojan known as the AIDS Trojan in 1989. This was sort of before the concept was even theoretically put together. It's a very weird story. And in 1996, two security researchers named Young and Young wrote a paper, and they said, once it becomes possible to, on a typical computer, typical server or end user's computer device, to encrypt files such that they can't be recovered by the user, and it becomes possible to untraceably pay people behind this sort of attack, we expect to see criminals develop ransomware. Basically, that's the description. In 1996, neither of those things were in place. Encryption, such encryption as existed, tended to be pretty weak. It was possible for defenders to just go in, break the encryption and decrypt the files rather than paying. And there was no method of untraceable payment. And so early ransomware attacks were often of the form, I'll decrypt your files, except you don't really need me to, if you put money into my bank account, which can be used to immediately locate me. So the person behind the AIDS Trojan, for example, was identified and subject to criminal sanctions around that. Between 1996, as encryption got better and better, we saw more and more developed ransomware strains, GP code being one of the prominent ones. And then in 2009, with the debut of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, digital currency more generally, we finally had both of the pieces in place for proper sort of full-scale ransomware campaigns. It was possible to encrypt a target's computer such that there was no reasonable prospect of decrypting it without the assistance of the attacker. And it was possible to transfer money in a way that was extremely difficult for law enforcement to trace. And so it became possible to, go into this criminal business. 2013, we saw CryptoLocker was probably the first high-profile strain. In 2017, there was a big multiplication. WannaCry, the Eternal Blue compromise, released a bunch of tools that ransomware attackers are still using to get into our systems. And we even saw prominent law firms, among other businesses, targeted with ransomware attacks. And moving into the present, we've seen new evolutions of tactics, new ransomware strains, and Maze, REvil, etc. And that's just a tiny slice of this pretty dynamic and evolving threat landscape. So what's the circumstance today as you're watching this webinar in 2021, either live or in replay? Well, again, most recent stats, these are always sort of a snapshot of the recent past rather than the exact present. The average ransomware attack now produces 16.2 days of average downtime. Again, that's up from even a few quarters or years ago. It's up quite a bit. And the thing that I always like to remind folks about when we see average stats is that means that there are some people who are over and there's some people who are under. The average ransom payment demanded is around $100,000, a bit more. And of course, the costs associated with a ransomware attack aren't just ransom. In general, in fact, we expect the ransom payment, whether or not that's made, to be a noticeable plurality, but certainly not the majority of costs associated with a ransomware attack. There are a wide range of recovery expenses, legal expenses. There can be impacts to business and reputation in ways that are sort of extremely hard to quantify in advance, and have these long-term ripple effects to businesses that experience a ransomware event. And finally, as I've mentioned, attackers are much more likely to exfiltrate and leak the data rather than to engage in the sort of classic pure ransomware attack of encrypting it in place. In terms of the distribution of ransomware strains, we see that there's a wide variety of ransomware strains in the market today. The highest is the time this statistic was taken. Again, it's probably evolved even since then. Had Sodinokibi at under 30%. And the reason that I like to sort of touch on this stat is that from a defender perspective, if the ransomware threat were primarily one malware strain, we would think about identifying the vulnerabilities that strain exploits, making sure that we were receiving threat intelligence with all of its latest hashes and varieties and so on and so forth, and sort of protecting against that. With ransomware, that's not possible. This pie chart evolves quarter over quarter, but it always tells the same story, which is that there's a wide variety of ransomware strains out there that aren't necessarily super related to each other. And so we need to think about defense at a higher level. We see that all industries likewise are under attack. Software services represents the highest percentage of attacks, public sector, the lowest that's tracked here. The capital goods is lower, capital goods and automobile. Professional services, which include legal, are at 20.4%. And then attack vulnerabilities, this is usually, attack vectors. This is the top three are pretty consistent: RDP, compromise, email phishing, software vulnerability, in that order. We've continued to see that stack ranking, and we don't expect, knock on wood, it's always scary as a defender or a cybersecurity expert to say we don't expect, because somewhere out there there's an attacker working to prove me dead wrong. But we expect that these will continue to be the three primary attack vectors for the foreseeable future, although they may change their priority pretty rapidly. So when Eternal Blue came out and there was this sort of new attacker package of software vulnerabilities to exploit, that grew dramatically as a fraction. RDP compromise, depending on how the RDP landscape of the remote desktop protocol landscape evolves, we might see that grow or shrink. Especially if defenders are able to get a better handle on RDP, there might be other remote desktop protocols exploited and so on and so forth. But it is probably going to fall into these three top level categories, again, for the foreseeable future, which just means, until an attacker is able to come up with something that we haven't seen yet. And so this is the second poll of this webinar, but I want to sort of phrase it as an open-ended conversational poll rather than a numerical poll. So if you can just drop into the chat window, what tools are you using today to protect yourselves from RDP compromise, from phishing email, and from software vulnerabilities? And there's sort of a range of technologies and strategies in place. Are we getting any feedback on that yet? There's sort of a range of technologies and strategies in place. You can use them. There's some of RDP compromise is mostly a question of good cyber hygiene. Phishing emails we can see mail security. We can see some really basic tools like making sure that external emails are marked external, and employee training. And then software vulnerabilities is all about vulnerability management and patch cadence. So having covered off on what is ransomware, what's its history, what's the current state of the threat, we're moving to the next question, which is, what is a ransomware attack like? And I have provided this sort of low production value simulation. The experience is, you're working on some sort of business task. In this case, it's a hypothetical sales campaign presentation that's being developed, and all of a sudden, your laptop screen or your computer screen is replaced, often with a sort of threatening red flashing screen. There was a fad for skull and crossbones in some of these varieties, and when you press any key, it takes you to a page where ransomware demands exist. This is kind of a extremely frightening and disruptive experience, and it happens very rapidly. It's unlike a service outage, or unlike data exfiltration attacks, or unlike even other sorts of attacks where an account is compromised. It really does have this sort of panic moment where a system that we were relying on is not only becomes unavailable, but ends up in the hands of our attackers. So the experience of a ransomware attack is, at first it's stressful. There's the sudden shock of being locked out of the environment for the end users, for IT practitioners and defenders, and I assume that that's most of the folks we have on this call. There's a lot of work immediately to contain the attack. That can involve shutting down huge fractions of your existing architecture and network, shutting down your connections, trying to prevent lateral movement, trying to prevent systems that have the ransomware installed from calling back to the command and control server and getting that signal to begin encryption. And it's scary off the bat. Then, once the ransomware attack is contained, there's a longer tail of work recovering data, re-imaging, reinstalling. That's often the experience that we talk about here is high levels of overtime, but sort of the worst kind of overtime, where you're doing repetitive and frustrating activities. You'll get a very real world insight into how effective your backup was and whether your backup has been compromised by these attackers. That's where we see those 16.2 days is mostly not in the containment phase, but in that the response phase, but in that recovery phase. And this is pretty disruptive, right? This is, if you think about 16.2 days, what would it mean to the IT projects that you have in scope? What would it mean to the business objectives that you've been set by leadership to have to throw half a month away to just get back to the baseline you're presently operating at? You're going to have to cancel your ongoing activities. You're going to have to cancel all of the sort of business level engagement. Any projects in flight are going to be delayed. And there's an element of embarrassment as well. The expectation in most ransomware attacks is that you're going to lose some data. You're not going to be able to recover it, whether that's because it wasn't backed up, because if you do pay off the attackers, and we don't recommend that, we'll mention that again later on, but even then, oftentimes there's still some data loss, and you have to reach out to clients, partners, anyone else who might have a copy of that. You're going to have to explain delays, costs, missed revenue, business reputation impacts to stakeholders, and your firm can take a reputation impact overall. And this is sort of what we see coming out of the stories of various ransomware attacks, but you really don't have to take my word for it, because we've brought Jason on to share his own experience with this type of attack. So Jason, take it away.
All right, thanks for this. So story time. So I started at the firm in 2016, and I was new to legal. And there was, long story short, there wasn't really a solid security program in place. As you've seen a lot of organizations, and that's just not law firms. But I'd like to think and like to say, as recently in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of improvements and focus on it. So it was December of 2016, and we got a call from one of the employees in our Miami office saying that his computer was acting weird. He couldn't open documents, and people in his area of the office started complaining about the same thing. And it was the first, I think it was the first kind of incident at the firm at that point of ransomware. So they made a call to the service desk, and we started our investigations, and we're trying to figure out how it got in and all these things. And he wasn't sure, and we eventually figured out it definitely came in over email. But the spread just started spreading too fast, and I had to make a decision at that point and make a call that I didn't want to make, and basically told everybody to shut off their computers and go home from that office. So that was probably my biggest experience at that point with an outbreak of ransomware. But I think I definitely made the right call there, as hard it was to make it. It's it's headquarters of all places that this is happening. So we shut everything down. Thankfully, after our investigations, there was no exfiltration of data. Then it came down to trying to figure out how it got in, and I had a suspicion it was over email and probably an attachment. So we started looking through, did our analysis through Mimecast, and found a suspicious looking Excel sheet. And so I was like, you know what? I think this is it, but I kind of need to know to be sure. So I was like, here's an idea. I'll just unplug my computer from the network, and I'll just run it and see what happens. So I did it, and yeah, it blew up my computer. And I was like, all right, found it. And that point, I got a new computer, so that was cool. So we did a discovery search and exchange, and we just completely, we got rid of it. Thankfully, as we started turning computers on, we probably had about a dozen that were infected that needed to be re-imaged and stuff. So wasn't terrible, but was great. Probably a day at most of an outage, at least for the one office. So at that point, I was still in the learning phases of legal and kind of the environment. I mean, it takes months, if not over a year, to kind of learn all the business processes and even focus on there's so many focuses, right? There's technology, there's security, and so but that definitely refocused me on our security program at the firm. And by the way, we didn't have a CISO, nor do we have one at the moment, but maybe one day. But what I learned through that process was while there are definitely superior products and best of breed, but the products aren't enough. Obviously, you need to have training, and while the initial focus is on end user training a lot of times, I would say that is very important and top of the list, but I think you need to train your team because you're there's a lot of bad habits out there, and things are done without regard to security because it's never been a thing. So we had admin rights on all the machines, which we yanked. People were just installing whatever they want left and right. We applied more network segmentation, and we definitely did change our antivirus software. But on top of all that, I'll say that it's not about the tools that you use. It's properly using them, and also creating an environment with security first in mind. So you can have all the best tools in the world, but if let's say an admin one time that I caught decided that they were going to open up RDP from the firewall from their local office to their machine for easy access, mind you, the excuse was that it was only whitelisted from his home IP address. I'm like, this is something that no tool is going to catch necessarily unless you're doing active threat hunting, and that's how we found it. So you gotta break the bad habits internally with your team first, and then you can teach your users how to have security in mind and have that be a focus when they're looking at emails or opening documents, whatever it is they're doing. And interestingly enough, at the beginning of this call, I got a bunch of emails about some impersonations that were going on. There was a couple bad actors going through our website and finding names of partners and then associates in the same office and sending forged emails to the associates from the partner, telling them, hey, can you give me a call? Can you do this? Can you do that? Good news is our SEG caught that, so they didn't go through. But this is an active thing. It doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are. Everybody's a target, and a lot of times they're going to go after the easiest targets. They're not necessarily about making a splash or the name of the place that they targeted. I mean, right? It'll take me 5 seconds right now to go check Shodan or Census and do a search for open RDP ports or Exchange servers running out there that haven't been patched, and searching for CVs and things like that. So they're just low hanging fruit. That's what it's all about. So that was my experience. It definitely revamped the entire security program here. I think we have a solid one in place, but it's constantly evolving, and we're constantly testing and checking because you never know. I mean, no one's immune.
Hey, Jason, I think you mentioned to me in conversation that you were relatively new at the firm when this happened.
Yeah, I'd only been there a year.
Yeah. How'd that feel? I just imagine it's got to be really stressful being the new guy in the situation and then dealing with all that.
Yeah, I take this bad habit of sometimes taking these things very personally, like it's a hit to my reputation, but which I mean, it can be, it is, it can be, but you have to get over that and do the right thing and not point fingers. And we're trying to run a business here, so we're not trying to be, it's not about who's better than who, or who's popular, or whatever, whatever it is, or trying to make a name for yourself. I am here with my team is here. We're here together to make our business run as efficiently as possible, and you know every day without incident, and that's what we're striving for.
Sounds like you did the right thing in recovering, and kudos to you for sharing that information with the audience, because it's rare that you get people that are willing to admit or talk about these situations. And I think it's great across industries when people talk about it, because when people have more information and they see that this is a real thing and it's not just a bunch of vendors trying to sell software. No, these are real threats. And with businesses, I think you must have heard this a million times. It's not a matter of whether or not your firm is going to get attacked with ransomware. It's all about when it's going to happen. And then when it happens, you need to be prepared to defend and to remediate.
So Jim, if I can piggyback right off that to get to some of the ransomware best practices, this is a little bit of a sort of homebrew variety of the NIST framework, so folks may recognize that. The focus on best practices for ransomware attack, and Jason, thank you for sharing your recovery experience, but I think that what you said at the end there about having a stable security program in place is really well taken, right? Most of your opportunity to affect the course of a ransomware incident takes place before attackers have even performed reconnaissance against you. And so, the first thing is going to be having, again, this sort of mainstay of security programs where you're identifying systems and data to understand what would be priority ransomware targets, what you would want to prioritize responding to and protecting, and formalizing and confirming that exercise with stakeholders. Jason's particular story didn't have too much of this one, and I'm glad to hear it. But there are certainly cases that you hear about where the IT team has their own list of priority assets or list of things that we're going to take offline to prevent the data from becoming encrypted, but that doesn't always agree, especially at larger organizations, with what every stakeholder thinks is the priority, and that can lead to some serious gaps response. Another part that we that maybe doesn't always end up in the security conversation as much, but is a huge part of ransomware preparedness, is backups. They should be regular, automatic, independent, and they should have validated restore plans. Independent, again, this is somewhat less common, but you definitely hear those horror stories about people who've got an ultra sophisticated automatic. It backs up every 20 microseconds to another server on the same network, right? And so that might be well and good when your backup strategy is about responding to a hard drive failing or something like that, but is not going to protect you from ransomware if the attackers are able to encrypt your backups as well, and they will go looking for it. They typically won't. Oh yeah.
I'm gonna chime in there just to add to my experience from that insanity. We have 3 different solutions that we use that go to 3 different places.
Yeah, see, that's great to hear, and that's absolutely what we're talking about. And maybe you can speak to this as well. How have you been validating the restore plans on those solutions you've got in place?
I didn't know you were supposed to do that, actually.
Well, it depends. I mean, that doesn't mean necessarily running a full restore.
I'm kidding.
They should have warned me. I was opening for a comedian.
Yeah, no, we've got the 20 millisecond, replication going on, which we test on. We have scheduled testing. If you don't schedule, it's not going to happen. It's like I tell people, like, if it's not on my calendar, then it's never going to happen, or it was never planned. So we have calendar testing for that, for our cloud backups, as well as the ones that's in on-premise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to hear that for Jason. I think if anyone out there is feeling that joke answer is their real answer, the experience of validating under an actual attack environment, attack situation is not one you're going to want to go through. Then, securing. So this is sort of speaking, I think, to the three major avenues of compromise that we've looked at and that Jason sort of spoke through as well. You're looking to secure against email phishing. That's going to involve mail security, training employees, and any sort of tools around that to reduce the risk of malicious software being delivered through a phishing campaign. You're going to want to look for RDP and other exposed access points, and ensure that you have a regular cadence for patching vulnerabilities and prioritizing them as well. Jason mentioned the sort of Exchange server, which hasn't been patched and it still has these known vulnerabilities on that. And that's something where, with the right solution in place, you can definitely prioritize your patching around the kind of vulnerabilities that are being used by attackers in the wild, and really zero in on the vulnerabilities that represent the greatest threat to the business. And then one more thing we like to talk about, one of the things that we do at Arctic Wolf is detection as well. If you've got the right instrumentation in place to detect an attack that's beginning or an attempt or an attack in progress, it's often possible to disrupt it before a wide range of systems are compromised. And that can be sort of the difference between, gosh, I have to re-image 3 laptops and sort of the fuller scale exercise Jason's talking about, or the even larger scale exercises that end up in the news. And finally, and this one can be out of scope for some folks, but if you have a large team and you have and you can get multiple stakeholders in this, it can be valuable to include a ransomware scenario in your tabletops or your red team exercises or whatever those look like, so that different organizations understand, different sections of the organization understand what a ransomware alert would mean, who has priority responsibilities on that, and are even just prepared to execute on instructions like everyone shut off your laptops and go home. I think in this pandemic or post-pandemic universe, we're familiar with how disruptive and surprising, sort of urgent, everyone turn everything off and go home requests can be. And in the context of a ransomware attack, again, it really matters that the business is able to respond to that rapidly. During and after an attack, I think Jason spoke through this. The thing that I like to emphasize about this, every time, is that the steps on these slides are constrained by prior choices. And so Jason was sort of in a difficult place coming into an environment where he wasn't able to build up the security program, and then was hit with a ransomware attack. He described an effective response, but it was constrained by the decisions that had been previously made and by the absence of an effective security program. And that sort of shapes the course of the response event. And the goals are, what Jason spoke through. You want to contain affected systems, isolate them from the network. You want to re-image all of your affected systems to a known good baseline and restore data from backups as necessary. But and I can't emphasize this enough, the amount of business disruption that a ransomware attack represents is going to be, can be minutes or months, and it really depends on having a security program in place, and making sure that all the right pieces are in place, so that, as Jim said, not if, but when you get targeted with ransomware, you're able to prevent most of the business disruption associated with it. Quick what not to do. Don't pay the ransom. The FBI says it encourages criminal activity and can be used to facilitate serious crimes, leads to other victimizations. If that's pretty straightforward. I hope that all of us in the Defender business are going to take the FBI's advice on that sort of thing. But even if you aren't, paying the ransom does not necessarily lead to the recovery of the data anyway. We can see fake ransomware, technical challenges with implementing the decryption, non-responsive criminals. The thing that we've seen grow dramatically recently is additional ransom demands. And this has been a classic problem in the world of blackmailing for as long as human history exists. But ransomware attackers seem to sort of take a minute to figure this out. They definitely figured this out now. When someone is willing to pay the ransom, ransomware attackers realize, they've got a live one on the hook. They've got an organization that really wants to have access to these systems again. They've got an organization that has the funds and the process in place to convert those funds into cryptocurrency and the technical know-how to do so and to transmit that money to the attackers. And if they decrypt in response to that first ransomware payment, they'll lose access to this. Ransomware attackers, from their perspective, it's definitely sort of a whale hunting business. Most of the time, they're not going to get a lot of money. They'll either fail to compromise serious systems, or the victims won't negotiate, or they're not going to be in a position to pay, or what have you. But so when they do have access to someone who is willing to pay, they are likely to just demand more money. We've seen a dramatic rise in the frequency of that. The other thing to just sort of flag is to be careful around ransomware recovery consultants. And there's definitely valuable experts in that space. And then on the other hand, ProPublica did a report. There were firms out there, they say we're high tech, sort of ransomware solutions will come in and decrypt your software. They charge the ransom plus an additional fee. They pay the ransomware attackers, and then they use that decryption and they take home the fee. So in addition to sort of not following the FBI's good advice here, there's the scam in place where they're really just acting as an arm of the attackers. And so the advice that I always give around that is, it's valuable to have existing incident response retainers. It's valuable to have existing relationships with security experts who are available to support this kind of incident. But ambulance chasers, it's going to be really hard, especially under the stressful and sort of real-time conditions of a ransomware attack, to pick out good actors in that ambulance chaser environment. And there are not as many good actors as we would wish for. So key takeaways from the presentation as a whole: your company is at risk of ransomware. If you get hit, it's going to be an unpleasant environment. That's from the practitioner perspective. And then maybe a thing to highlight to managing partners and the kind of committees at firms that are responsible for making these kind of strategic security investments. The costs aren't just ransom. Indeed, ransom typically does not represent the majority of the cost. It's much more concentrated on the extensive recovery required, even if the ransom is paid, and the business disruption, and then the firm reputation hit, which is often the sort of the hardest to quantify, but the most serious impact. If you prepare up front, you can have a more effective response. You can have if you have built out, like Jason has, a security team and a security strategy. You can back up your data, secure against the primary methods of attack, develop a detection policy, and always throughout this working with experts to deploy, monitor, manage, and report on these solutions. That's something that Arctic Wolf and Frontline Managed Services, we're here to help with those sorts of things, bring a lot of the expertise to the table necessary to get your firm in place to handle this kind of threat. And so with that, let's move into questions.
Okay. All right, I'm looking through the questions right now, and quite a few questions. And if we don't get to your specific question, we'll make sure that we follow up with you on it. Let's start with Barbara. Pull that up. Remind us, what is an RDP compromise?
Yeah, so RDP is Remote Desktop Protocol, and specifically, it's a capability that Windows makes available so that IT teams and other administrators can manage a desktop remotely. In cybersecurity, there's always a trade-off between ease of use and the effectiveness of a tool in the hands of an attacker. So Windows has made it really easy through Remote Desktop Protocol for administration teams to remotely access Windows instances, to move software around, to do so with high level permissions. But if that's not configured correctly, then attackers can identify a machine that's sitting there and saying, okay, anyone who comes in and tells me that tells me that they're a remote administrator can access can install malicious software. So that's what we're talking about. And attackers will also sometimes compromise administrator accounts and then use the RDP or other update management capabilities to distribute their malicious software across the environment. Jason, did you want to add anything to that? I'm sorry, I just jumped right on that one.
No, you're good. I'm good.
There's a little thing. I remember when people were first opening up RDP on their firewalls to allow that access, but then they would change the listening port, thinking that that was a good enough solution to prevent random people from accessing the RDP by just changing the port number. But I think it was quickly proven that that wasn't an adequate solution, and that you need to put your RDP behind some multi-factor authentication or a VPN or some other solution. Don't go for the cheap, I'm going to hide the port a little bit and hope that nobody finds it, because I think that never works out well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim. Yeah, absolutely. Those sort of one weird tricks are as effective in protecting you from hackers as one weird trick is sort of across the board. And when we were talking about these kind of open configuration vulnerabilities, attackers are scanning for them, right? They're not just trying the single most obvious approach and then saying, oh, okay, and walking away if it doesn't work. They're looking for these vulnerabilities actively. So yeah, just that port switch is unlikely to.
One of the things that just don't expose RDP to the internet, because it doesn't matter if you have MFA. You should have MFA, but if they expose a vulnerability, then your MFA is kind of useless. If you need remote access, I mean, there's so many options out there, especially for whether it's vendors or whatever it is. So just don't do it.
That's great. All right, next question is from Abigail. I like this one. For sharing team members on websites, what are the best practices? Do you recommend not sharing email addresses? You go to somebody's website and you find there's a list of the employees, of the staff, and then they include the email addresses. And that seems to be what enables a lot of these spear phishing attacks or these whale attacks, is that somebody is seeing the email addresses of the executive team of the company, and they know that if they spoof the CFO and send an email to the CEO, that it might get some attention. So what do you think is what do you recommend when it comes to including email addresses on websites?
Jason, you want to go first on that one?
Look, corporate's going to do whatever they want to do with that. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but especially here at law firms, you want to get a hold of somebody. They want to send you, they want to be able to look up people and be able to easily contact them. The last thing you want from a business perspective is making it hard for me to contact the lawyer. So then the onus is on us to train, number one, users how to look for those kind of attacks, which, like I said, just happened an hour ago here. We have impersonation protection turned on in Mimecast, and thing proof point. And two, teaching the employees how to look for that kind of stuff. Three, you want to take it a step further. There's even tools out there that'll actually flag it inside of Outlook and tell you that this does not look like a legitimate email based on, you can take that as far as you want, but you can't. There's just some practical things you can keep get in the way of that. So I don't know. This is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. You know, there's a certain amount of value in. I think that, you know, with that, the advice is always, you know, you have to understand the business requirements, and it's a good idea not to do that without thinking. You know, if there are identities or accounts that are only have an internal purpose, you know, that would be especially likely to be exploited in this, and are especially likely to be exploited in the spear phishing way, it's sort of worth review. But especially in the law firm environment where, you know, a lot of the senior people are also practicing lawyers, they really want new clients to be able to get a hold of them, or forgetful clients to be able to look it up. It's going to be a losing battle compared to the kind of mail security that Jason described.
Great. All right. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Lewis, can you move forward to the next slide for the coming soon?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's speak to that for a sec first, and then we can cover those questions. We did just want to highlight that we have some upcoming events. Frontline Managed Services is going to have a panel discussion on whether firms are going to embrace self-help and self-service for IT support. Date and time coming soon, but Jim, I'm sure you all are going to make sure that attendees and registrants for this webinar get that info. And over here at Arctic Wolf, we're having a summer SecOps roundtable with a special guest, Guy Fieri. So we're going to be talking about evolutions in the cybersecurity landscape across the board, and we'll be bringing in Guy Fieri because when you think of cybersecurity, who doesn't think of Guy Fieri? No, he'll be providing some cooking advice. So, you know, we'll specialize in cybersecurity, he'll specialize in cooking. It'll be a great time for all, and that's June 23rd at 4 to 5:30 Eastern. So we'll hope to see some of you here as well, and we're really looking forward to that event too.
Okay, great. And looks to me like we still have 2 minutes, so maybe we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
This one's from Daniel. How are we seeing the cyber insurance organizations adjust their stance in the increase of current attacks?
You know, that's an interesting environment question, and I think, you know, we're going to continue to see evolution on that. The way that insurance always responds to an increase in threat is they're going to raise the premiums, or they're going to make the policies more restrictive. And so the thing that I would encourage everyone who has cyber insurance, or maybe is dealing from pressure from partners, you know, why do we need to defend against this? We'll just insure against the outcome. Is, you know, make sure you look at what's covered and what isn't, because often the areas of greatest expense or disruption are not really things that you can meaningfully insure against.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Daniel, sorry. Fun fact, get docketing software will reduce your rates. True story.
Okay. All right, so looks like we're at the end. I want to make sure that everybody knows if you did submit a question, they're all important, and we'll make sure that they do get a response. We will follow up with you. I did want to thank everybody who signed on today to attend this webinar. Jason, I really want to thank you for your time. I know that you're a busy guy, and sounds like you've got some of your own stuff dealing with today with some of those that are coming in. And Lewis, this was great for me. You're very knowledgeable on the topic, and I really appreciate your help in putting this event together.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim, for hosting. And Jason, thanks so much for your candor and openness. It's really rare and valuable. So I'm so glad you're able to join us.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.